Hello everybody, and welcome to this brief video in which we're going to talk about implicit and explicit attitudes. All right, and whether or not there's actually a difference between them, whether or not we actually have two different attitudes. Now, this idea that we might have implicit attitudes that we're not necessarily aware of, and they may differ from explicit attitudes that we're aware of, comes from findings in which when we use different measurement techniques, we sometimes find different attitudes. So we can use self-report based measures. Oftentimes these are survey-based measures, and these tend to reveal and have been acknowledged as explicit, or tend to acknowledge to reveal explicit attitudes. The attitudes that people tend to be are that we know that they're aware of. Implicit attitudes, those attitudes that we don't necessarily know that people are aware of, these tend to show up on more implicit measures that require reaction times. So some prototypical versions are the IAT, although the IAT has fallen out of grace in the field. Another version that seems to still be quite a bit in use is the affect misattribution procedure. Affect misattribution procedure. This is when you show participants first some stimulus that is thought to evoke some evaluation. So the attitude object, right? So, and then after that, you show them either something pleasant or something unpleasant. It could be an image, or it could be positive words or negative words, all right? But either way, you first show them the attitude object, the object that presumably they have some evaluation of, and then you show them something that is good or is bad, all right? And then the task that you give the participants is simply, their job is to identify the second stimulus as good or bad. So one trial involves first showing them the attitude object, image or a word. Second, showing them a good or bad stimulus. Third, the participant has to identify that third item as good or bad. So that second item is good or bad. So attitude object, good or bad stimulus. The participant has to has to respond on a computer whether that second stimulus is good or bad. Now, remember, these are reaction time measures, so we don't really care necessarily whether they say it's good or bad, all right? Most usually people will say that the stimuli that we think are good, like the word happy, the word sunshine, most times people are going to say that positive stimuli are good. And so all the responses will line up that way. And usually people will say that negative stimuli, like sadness, hate, all right, they're going to say that these stimuli are bad. All right, there's not going to be a whole lot of variance in that. All right, but what we care about is how quickly they do it. All right, so if we show them, because again, remember, you have the attitude object, the second stimulus, which is either good or bad. All right, so it might be the word happy, or it might be the word hate, right? And then the participant's response. If they have a negative attitude towards that attitude object that you show them first, then if the second stimulus you show them is a positive one, like it's the word happy, then they're probably going to say that it's a good stimulus, but they're going to take longer to do it. They're going to take a fraction of a second longer to say, yeah, that's a good stimulus. If you show them a stimulus that they have a negative attitude towards, and the second item is a negative stimulus, so like the word hate, right? They're going to say that it's bad, but they're going to say it's bad faster, a fraction of a second faster. Now, if whatever that attitude object is, they have a positive attitude towards, then everything I just said is going to be reversed. So let's have a full-on example, right? So let's say I show you a picture of pizza, all right? That's the attitude object, all right? So I'll show you a picture of pizza. And let's say you like it. You love pizza. And if you don't, what's wrong with you? I'm playing. Then, this is all one trial, and again, you'd have multiple trials. See a picture of pizza, then I show you the word happy. And then your job is to say, is that a good or bad stimulus? Well, most people, I know not everybody, but most people are going to say, well, that's a good stimulus. Now, it's going to take them a little while between the time they see the word happy on the computer screen and the time and when they finally press the button saying, in which indicates they think that that is a happy or positive stimulus, right? So it's going to be a little bit of time between the time they see happy and they say happy and they say that it's good. That time is what we care about. That difference in time is what we care about. All right. So if you have, like I said, a positive attitude towards pizza, I show you a picture of pizza, then I show you the word happy, and you have to tell me whether happy is a good or bad stimulus. You say happy. You say that it's good stimulus. All right. Well, if you have a positive attitude towards pizza, then when you see happy, you're going to say, oh yeah, it's a good stimulus, faster than if you had a negative attitude towards pizza. If you had a negative attitude towards pizza, then when you saw happy, yeah, you'd probably still say that happy is a good stimulus, but you're probably going to respond a little bit slower. And so we use the reaction times as a gauge of your implicit attitude. All right. And we do our best to make sure that you can't bias your reaction. And certainly you're thinking, well, I can slow down when I answer. Absolutely you can. But we cut out response times that are longer than a certain period of time, and we cut out response times that are shorter. All right. If a response time is longer, usually it's cut off at a second. So if your response time takes longer than a second, then that tells us, without question, you probably did something. You probably tried to change your response to it. And if your response is less than about 200 to 300 milliseconds, that tells us you probably didn't actually respond. You're probably not actually reporting a genuine evaluation. You're probably just hitting a key. All right. And so we do things to try and, with these implicit measures like this affective misattribution procedure, we do things to try and cut out your ability to change your response. Well, on self-report measures, we can't do that, all right, because you have all day to complete that measure. So with implicit measures like the affective misattribution procedure, again, I guess before I move on, I want to make sure that it's clear why that it's called that. Affect, emotion, misattribution, attributing something to the wrong source procedure. So the AMP, or the affective misattribution procedure, operates on the idea that the affect or the evaluation associated with the attitude object gets misattributed to the second stimulus, and it influences your reaction time, right? So if the second stimulus is happy, if you have a negative attitude towards the attitude object, that negative attitude gets misattributed to the word happy, and you can correct for it and you can say, oh yeah, that is a good stimulus, but it takes you a little bit of time, all right? But if you have a positive attitude towards the attitude object and you see happy, then the evaluation of the attitude object and the evaluation of the word are consistent. So you can say that, yeah, that's a good stimulus, and you can do that quicker, all right? So the fact that you have a shorter reaction time at correctly classifying positive stimuli after seeing the attitude object, then that tells us that you have a positive attitude towards the attitude object. If you had a longer reaction time at classifying positive stimuli as good, then that would tell us you probably have more of a negative attitude towards that attitude object. Now, the AMP, the affect attribution procedure, that's an implicit measure. So you've got these self-report measures and you've got these implicit measures. And sometimes they predict different things. So for example, in one study from, it's a classic study now, by Davidio, Kawakami, and I believe Gartner is the third on that paper. They measured participants' implicit and explicit attitudes towards Black folks, and then measured both monitored behaviors, so behaviors that we can pay attention to and control, and unmonitored behaviors like eye blinking. So we tend to blink our eyes more when we're uncomfortable. And fidgeting, we tend to fidget more when we're uncomfortable. And what they found is that explicit attitudes, the ones measured by self-report, those predicted monitored behaviors, like how friendly people were in their talking. Whereas the implicit attitudes predicted unmonitored behaviors, like eye blinking and fidgeting, all right, when in an interview with a Black person, okay? So we have evidence, right, that there seems to be these two different attitudes. Explicit attitudes, the attitudes that you're aware of, and implicit attitudes, these attitudes that you're not necessarily aware of. And oftentimes they're consistent, but not always. And when they're inconsistent, they predict different things. And presumably they always predict different things if they are indeed two different attitudes. But there's some question about whether or not they are actually two different attitudes. So you have these dual attitude models, which assumes that you can indeed have two different attitudes, an implicit attitude and an explicit attitude. But then there's these single attitude models. These models assume that you have one true attitude. But the reason you see differences in the assessments of that attitude on implicit versus explicit measures, reaction time versus self-report measures, is because explicit measures capture the attitude after it's been filtered through a bunch of social desirability concerns and other automatic processes. So part of the reason that implicit attitudes and explicit attitudes may differ is because, according to these single attitude models, is because the implicit attitude may be socially undesirable, or the person doesn't want to respond, doesn't want to report it for some other reason, whatever. And so it gets pulled through those concerns. And then the explicit attitude that we get at the end, that's a product not only of the attitude, but also of these social desirability concerns and other motivated reasoning concerns. So we've got our dual attitude models, which suggests we can have two attitudes about the same thing at the same time, an implicit attitude towards it and an explicit attitude towards it. And we have these single attitude models, which argue that both implicit and explicit measures, both reaction time and self-report measures, are measuring the same thing, but the explicit measures are just assessing the attitude after it's being pulled through a bunch of cognitive filters, okay? Now, which one is right? That's something that's unresolved in the field right now. We still see people talking about implicit attitudes, although that's happening less and less. And of late, we've seen more people kind of embrace this idea of a single attitude. But as far as I know right now, that is an unsettled point in the field. So it's important to know that yes, implicit measures, these reaction time measures, can assess an attitude and reveal an attitude that can sometimes be different than the attitude revealed by explicit measures or self-report measures. All right. All right, guys, that's it for this video. So again, we talked about implicit versus explicit attitudes, and we talked about how they're measured, and we talked about whether or not implicit and explicit attitudes are actually different. All right. All right, guys, that's it for this video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. If not, then I'll catch you later.